Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I am here with Lynn Heiberger. I got that right. We were practicing beforehand. She is with UCF, Unified Compliance Framework. She's the COO. She actually was there when it was first the inception of UCF. And we've been working with them probably, I think, about from the time that you guys actually came to be. Is that right?
Yep.
Yeah. So we've got a great partnership. We've got a lot of material out there. We've got lots of customers that love us, and there's a fabulous solution that Lynn's got that we actually want to see a little bit more of. So Lynn, if you can share with us the UCF solution and the Common Control Hub, that would be great.
Love to. Hello, everybody. It's nice to meet you, and thank you very much for taking time out of your busy day to hear about the Unified Compliance Framework. So the first thing I'm going to do is queue up our PowerPoint presentation. Take a look at that now. And you should see our first slide, which is the science of compliance, which compliance is not an art. It truly is a science. It is something where we must prove.
I don't think we're sharing yet.
Okay, let me go here.
Yeah, while Lynn's doing that, I just want to remind everybody that our integration with UCF is actually through our governance, risk, and compliance product. I just assume everybody knows that whenever I'm talking to them. But Lynn's going to talk to you a little bit about the ability to integrate with UCF with policy and compliance, and how when we integrate, we're actually able to import the variety of regulations that UCF manages. And not only import, but also help you as a customer be able to more accurately and more easily ensure compliance for all the different regulations. Beyond that, we also allow you to harmonize those controls, which Lynn will show you as we go along, which is a key part of being able to optimize and automate some of your GRC processes. The ability to reduce the number of controls saves significant time and significant cost, because those people that were previously going through manual processes are now able to automate those processes on a fewer number of controls.
Are you able to see my screen now?
Yeah, you look great.
Okay, super. Sorry about that. So what we see here is this logo for the Unified Compliance Framework. And this is the first part of our presentation today, a PowerPoint deck. But I've got a little bit more exciting stuff going on. I have a real-time demonstration in the Common Controls Hub. That's where you build your list for inclusion in ServiceNow GRC. We're also going to take a look at the kind of output that is included in ServiceNow GRC in Excel. And Teresa will talk a little bit more to that and what that looks like. And finally, we'll wrap with Q&A. In the PowerPoint deck, I really want you to focus on the terms that I'm using: control, citation, mandate, authority document. We'll also talk about the documents that were included in the invite: GDPR, PCI, HIPAA, FedRAMP. I also threw ISO into the mix, ISO 27001. And then once we're done with that PowerPoint, we're going to build out our framework with those documents. It's a common controls list that we're going to build out in the hub, the Common Controls Hub. We're going to review the controls in the research portal. That's one of the components of the Common Controls Hub that allows you to really understand what is being asked of you within the mandates of a citation from an authority document. And then we're going to look at that actual output of the data and how it can be leveraged for evidence collection, attestation, measurement of risk. We're also going to look at how you can communicate what you are doing as an organization easily with third parties, showing them the authority documents you are compliant with, as well as all of the citations and the mandates within them. Okay, now let's dig in on the PowerPoint. It's interesting, this slide has not changed much over years. As a matter of fact, the statements, these 4 statements, are even more pronounced in the compliance universe. It's as if somebody in the finance industry started talking to somebody in the energy industry, and they all started sharing the same ideas, and we see more and more overlap, and we see standards and regulations and best practices getting bigger and bigger, not lighter and lighter. And so we end up in a world of overlapping and redundant controls, which unfortunately, as we see more and more audits happening, more and more attestation being necessary, we have audit fatigue. 10 years ago, I never even heard that word, audit fatigue. Now it's something I hear over and over and over again at every conference I go to. And so now we're surrounded by some solutions that are streamlined and easy to use, and others that have added more and more modules of complexity. And it leaves us in what I call compliance chaos. And I don't know about you, but some days I actually feel while I'm working through all of this that there's just no end in sight, and it's one giant sea of chaos. So what do we do about this? Well, first of all, let's really acknowledge the problem. Is there overlap? I know that all of you believe that, but I'll take you through a really neat example that we did with ISO 27001. In this Venn diagram, you can see that we have 132 overlapping controls. 894 are unique to the banking industry. 58 are unique to ISO, but we have an opportunity in that 132. And this opportunity is not just with banking. It also exists with healthcare, PCI, the credit card industry. Privacy. Privacy is a very large, emerging focus internationally, domestically. Again, when we started out in this, it was California had a law. Now, every single state in the United States has a privacy law. Finally, Sarbanes-Oxley, something that's been around forever. Again, overlap with ISO. So what is our solution? A common control framework, and utilizing that framework to address all of our audit and attestation requirements. First of all, what is a common control? A common control does not exist as a best practice. A common control serves the purpose as an anchor to tie mandates from citations together. So if you're saying, back up the data, make a copy of the data, it can all tie back to a single common control, back up critical data. That way, within your organization, you're saying it once. You're collecting evidence once. You're not confusing your organization as the next thing and the next thing and the next thing comes out saying exactly the same thing. And you as a compliance expert are deciphering through those mandates to tie it to that crisp common control. Originally, we all crosswalked. We had a couple things we needed to be compliant with. And here what we're looking at are 4 different citations with 1 or more mandates that are tied together saying the same thing. The problem is twofold. What happens when number 1 is being updated? That means you've got to remap it all over again to 2, 3, and 4, and maybe it doesn't map anymore. And then maybe 4 is changing. Imagine if you have 5, 10 different things you need to comply with. It becomes untenable. The better approach is the common control. I'm going to take a moment here for you to take a look at this control. Provide access, that's the verb phrase, to personal records, the noun phrase, when a personal data request is received. That common control in the middle allows all 4 documents to map to it with their citation and their mandate. Notice it's coming from 4 different countries, but they're still all saying the same thing. And if number 1 changes, number 1 only has to look at the common control framework. It does not need to look at 2, 3, and 4. Let's take a look at a real world example. And interestingly enough, I am going to focus on NIST 800-171 throughout this presentation, especially towards the end. But what we can have here is section 312, limit information system access. Those are the primary nouns and verbs. And then in transaction functions, authorized users are permitted, execute, are the secondary nouns and verbs from section 312. So that is the mandate within the citation. That mandate maps to Common Control 1411, establish access rights based on lease privilege. That's the Common Control. But what do you know? In the same document, in the same section, and the same subsection, they're saying the same thing. Employee principal lease privilege maps also to establish access rights based on lease privilege. Why does this happen? Because most authority documents are written by committee. They're either written by legislators, they're written by lawyers, they're written by participants from large corporations. And nobody wants to say to anybody, oh no, Bob already said that, we don't need what you said. They're like, sure, let's say it again. And we, the compliance folks, get stuck with having to go through this over and over again. We even see situations where we'll see the same mandate multiple times within the same citation. A citation is a section of text that cannot be broken apart in any logical way other than you can break it apart as paragraphs, bullets, and so forth, but at a certain point, you cannot break apart that citation any more than it is, whereby you may have more than one mandate. And I'll show you examples of that later. So here we are. We talk about the benefits of a common control framework. We can use all sorts of authority documents as long as it maps to our framework and bring them in. We have over 1,000 active authority documents focusing on IT security, privacy, etc. We even map in documents for organizations that are private for themselves to use so they can compare. And that can be brought over into ServiceNow GRC, all mapped in and ready to go. We have a single set of controls. That is so important to an organization because now you have a language of compliance. Your organization isn't saying things 5 different ways. You remove a lot of the chaos and confusion. It's easier to keep up with regulatory changes. Remember our slide with the 4 boxes? We only have one control now that we need to worry about. So when document changes, we're always referring back to our framework. You can do a common control audit, and I will show you later how audit questions relate to a common control. You ask the question once, not 5 times. And you're able to take that evidence and tune that evidence for multiple audits during attestation. The devices, the data may change, but the function, backup, encrypt, keep in an asset management database, all those functions remain the same between different scopes for different audits. I'll let you read this for a moment, and then I have a few comments. The framework is not just the controls. The framework is the entire methodology for inclusion of authority documents and all of the metadata that goes around that common control. You have a world of metadata as we look at the roles that are applied to a control, the assets that are applied to a control. Because we learn every time we map a mandate to a control based upon the metadata around that mandate, and we include that with our common control. And that way we can share not only the control, but all that other information with the auditor. Let's dig in here, and this is, I'm going to do some slides before I actually jump over to the Common Controls Hub. But what you're seeing right here is what we see in the Common Controls Hub. And I selected FedRAMP, that's the 3rd document, PCI, 4th document, and GDPR, the 5th document. HIPAA has many documents, just like Sarbanes-Oxley. The actual law itself, which is the 1st document, and then supporting documents to achieve the mandates within HIPAA. Here I've selected NIST 866. These documents are now in my list. So here I have my documents on the left, and I have my controls on the right. You'll notice that there are some in italics, there are some in bold, and some you do not see, which are just standard, called implementation. The one in italics are to maintain the hierarchy. They do not map to anything that is mandated. We have 791 mandated controls. Those are required, and they are tied back to one or more mandates within your list. We also have a citation count. There are 1,419 citations in all of those 5 documents in total. We're able to reduce that to 1,244 mandates. How can we reduce that? Because many citations don't say anything. We need to include them so that we have context, but they're not a call to action. They're not a mandate. They can be giving background. They can be giving information. They can be giving definitions, but they're not a call to action. So once we extract all of the mandates, our total count was 1,244. Those now map to 791 mandated controls. Going back to why we're doing this in the first place, which is we have a deduplication factor based upon 791 mandates mapped back to those 1,244 controls. Basically, we've cut it down to half. We're asking half the questions. So now I remember that number, 791. What if I added in another authority document? Let's say ISO. And trust me, I didn't plan flipping the numbers like this. It just happened to happen this way. But when I add in ISO, what we see is 971 mandated controls, which is even better for my deduplication factor. I talked a little bit about privacy. This is one of the latest California privacy laws. And every document that you have here has a bibliography, so you know where to find it, when it was released, who wrote it, and other things it can be called. Now I'm going to take a look at my list. This is something else that we can do in the Common Controls Hub. And I'm going to compare my list, called this UCF ServiceNow GRC version 1, and my list, and see if there's any intersection with the California Civil Code. Very small intersection. That's the A and B. In total, I have 999 controls if I was to include California. We can take a look here and see what I do have in common of those 3. One of the controls, one of the 3 that I have in common, is notify interested personnel and affected parties that a security breach was detected. Well, this is about privacy. My guess is it's probably overlapping with GDPR. And I guessed right. So on top, you can see what California says. Let me just step back here for a moment and remind us. Notify interested personnel and affected parties that a security breach was detected. And I can see what California is saying and the way GDPR says it 3 times. I'll let you take a look at the slide for a moment. And you notice how GDPR, how convoluted it is. I will show you again later in the presentation what that authority document looks like and how difficult it is to decipher something of this complexity in the way it is written. So that common control ties to audit questions. So instead of asking 4 different things or throwing some poor person under the GDPR bus, you can ask these sets of questions, these 2 questions here, to see if you are satisfying that mandate within California's law and GDPR. Finally, what's most important in all of this, a common control framework is not something that you're going to talk to any auditor and say, I'm compliant with my framework. We're all good. No. Your FFIEC auditor, your PCI, QSA, your external auditor, they're not going away anytime soon. Ultimately, you still have to be accountable for the mandate within the citation. And notice the color coding here. So this is what California is saying, and this is the common control. Every single mandate within an authority document needs to be tagged and matched to a common control in order for this methodology to work. And you'll notice how we have to really sift through here to find out what it's actually saying. So we're about to wrap up the PowerPoint presentation, but I just wanted to talk about a few things in closing. We're talking primarily about attestation, evidence collection, auditing, and so forth. Audit practices and risk management practices are parallel disciplines. Audit starts out with, am I doing this at all? I have a set of controls that I need to satisfy. I need to provide evidence that I'm doing it at all. When we get into risk management, we can leverage that same set of controls and look at the next phases of maturity. We call it the 3 E's. Am I evident? Do I exist at all? Am I effective? Do I work? Am I efficient? Am I aligned to the requirements of my organization based upon the risk? So we take that control framework and we look at how well we are applying all of those and align what is required for compliance, supplementing it for risk mitigation when it's not necessarily a compliance requirement, especially around areas of IT security and protection of data. And we now have a risk management framework aligned with our control framework. We have the benefits of using the same language, the same communication, the same questions, the same evidence. It's just we add that layer of risk management on top to make sure that our organization, even more protected, is more likely to be compliant, more likely to protect everything in line with the risk that's presented the organization. And once we achieve that, I like to call that compliance nirvana. Calm seas. So we're done with the PowerPoint presentation. I'm going to jump over now to the Common Controls Hub and what you would see over there. Teresa, do we have any pressing questions at this point?
We do. We actually have a couple of them.
Go ahead.
You were talking a lot about the different regulations, the way that you bring them in, and common controls. And you mentioned Common Controls Hub a few times. So the question is, what if the document I want isn't in your list of documents that you provide?
So we have multiple ways of bringing documents in for paid subscribers. You can put a request into our community. You can put a request into our help desk. You can supplement a document being put in if it's not in high demand. High demand to us is only 5 organizations that have paid subscriptions requesting a document, then it automatically goes in our queue. We don't let anything get past the 3 plus requests. We stay on top of that. You always think there's all this stuff out there, but quite frankly, the compliance landscape changes quite a bit, but we focus again on areas, and I'll show you right now, IT security, privacy, records management, different verticals such as banking and so forth. We also have professional services where we can map it in if it's just an obscure document, as long as it's in English, that we can map in for you. You can also map in documents yourself. We have a product called the UCF Mapper, and you can map a document into your own account for your own private use. Many organizations do that with their own framework, so they can compare and contrast their framework with all of the documents in the Common Controls Hub.
Yeah, that's great. You know, and I guess I can't stress enough what you were just talking about with being able to harmonize the controls and reduce the number of controls. That's such a huge benefit to organizations, and I'm hopefully you'll show that a little bit more. We have one more question that I think you're also going to show, which is what happens when regulations are changed or updated. So as you're going through the demo, maybe you can talk a little bit about that and show us where people would actually see that occurring.
Sure. I have a great example, and I'll kind of jump around a little bit, not planned, but
We do flexible here.
okay. So I'm going to choose a document, and we'll be talking about this document later, but so we update documents when there is what we call a material change. It means that if you didn't do it, you'd fail your audit. A good example is PCI 3.2.1. Now everybody's like, oh, map that in. Like, well, what part do you want us to map in? .1. There is no .1. The document is called 3.2.1. Well, all they changed were some boxes on the side, not the actual what you must do to be PCI compliant. It was guidance, not the control you need to be compliant with. We said, no, we're not mapping that in. But 800.171 had material enough changes that we went ahead and mapped in the next version, which was v.revision 1. So what does that look like? And I'm using our compare feature here. And you'll notice, if you recall back from the slide, there's a tremendous amount of overlap and only 4 things changed. 1 thing got left behind in the old one, and 3 new things were introduced.
Yeah, so that's a very easy visual way for customers that are using UCF and Common Controls Hub to be able to see when these regulations are updated, because as you pointed out, they do change fairly frequently.
Correct, they do. And for us, it's a very easy process. If there's only a couple of changes, we get that done in hours. If there's a huge delta, we've been watching NIST 853 R4 versus R5. And originally we thought, oh, we'll get that done in a couple of weeks. And now we're looking and we're like, oh my gosh, they're rewriting the whole thing. So it's a very linear process and how we bring documents in. It's number of mandates that need to be tagged and matched and it takes us about 20 minutes each for 3 people to bring these things in. And so we have a little icon here. So how much money you just saved? Well, this wasn't very much because it was only a couple of items, but still you get the point. It's click, click, and you can see the changes that have occurred. And also all this stuff is mapped in for you. And the nice thing about working in the Common Controls Hub, before you push into your system of record, ServiceNow GRC, you're able to see, what the controls look like, what you're up against. You can say, well, let's see, I've got these 3 new controls. What kind of budget do I need? Not much, I'm good. But imagine if there was 200 new controls that you had to do. That's a big deal. That's a whole full next year planning budget. So it allows you, again, to manipulate, to look at, and evaluate your compliance universe before putting it into your system of record.
Yeah, and I think that dollar value that you just clicked on there, just what you were saying, if you were bringing a whole new regulation in that you had not mapped before, that dollar value is going to get a lot larger. And then, in line with that, your savings, the time you're saving to be able to actually map that regulation and adhere to that regulation is going to be a lot less since you've gone through the process of harmonizing the controls.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So time savings, and time is money.
That's our little icon.
Yep.
Okay. All righty. So you're going to spend most of your time in this part of the portal, and this is where you build out your list. So I'm going to go ahead and select the documents, and I'm cheating a little bit because I did research beforehand. So I typed in HIPAA, I see 4 documents. Well, I have to do some research to know what documents I want, and I can leverage the research portal to do that. Let's just go ahead and build our list. So I'm going to select the first document and the second document. Notice one is the law and one is a supporting document. Also, we talked about FedRAMP. Also to be included in our presentation. PCI, and PCI is just awesome for having multiple versions of everything. We have over 50 PCI documents because there's so many different questionnaires, and people, believe it or not, are still using 2.0 and 3.1, etc. So anything that somebody's consuming in a list, we have to keep publishing. But I'll use the ever popular 3.2. And finally, we have GDPR. And here we have some audit questions from ARMA, but we're going to go with the real GDPR. So now we have 5 documents in our list. What does that look like? Now remember, that's our 791 mandated controls. Controls that are implied maintain the hierarchy. And we can see here that this particular control ties to nothing because it's implied. If you say prioritize your patches, one would assume you have a patch management program. But believe it or not, there are documents out there that simply say prioritize patches and don't say anything about having a patch management program. But one would think it would be implied that you do if you prioritize your patches. So we have our implied. Now let's take a look at mandated. Establish and maintain an access control program. Control 11702. That ties to 2 things within PCI, Section 7.3 and Section 8.4. Notice these are citations. Citations can have 1 or more mandates. We also have items that are what we call implementation controls, and notice how many there are. Those are things that other people have said to do that are not tied to any one of these 5 documents. So I could start drilling down. And notice this one right here is not tied to any particular authority document that we've selected. But it might be a good idea if you'd like to accomplish the thing above. We include those so that you have ideas about how you can execute your programs, your policies. The hierarchy is laid out where a high level strategic and policy goes down to programs. It drills all the way down to tactics, procedures, configuration. Really leveraging that universe of authority documents that's included in the Unified Compliance Framework. So here we have our 791. Let's add in that ISO 27001 document and see what happens to our audit universe. Just like in the PowerPoint presentation, we have 971 mandated controls, things we must do, things that are being tied to mandates within these authority documents. Now, I already took the liberty of creating this and saving this as a list, but it's as simple as saving your list, costs you nothing. You need to make sure to share it. That way you can see it within ServiceNow GRC. But as I had said before, I have created this list. Let's see what that looks like. Again, here's my 971 mandated controls tied to these 6 documents. Let's use our compare feature to see what California looks like. I'm going to put California on the left, and I recall that document number is 2862. Little tip for those of you already using these systems: the larger the number, the more recent the document. In our history, we've put in over 3,000 documents. So we have a lot of experience doing this. I'll go back to my list. And again, I'll see that little bit of overlap. Only 3. Take a look here. I'm going to drill down. I'll open this up a bit. Here's my common control. And here's what California says. And here's what GDPR says. Isn't it interesting how similar this is? And this is a newer document, the California document. You think that, oh, this stuff couldn't all match and overlap, but really take a look at it. A general description, breach incident. They do look at each other's stuff and they do copy. And here we have GDPR saying it in Article 34.2 and 33.3a. I had mentioned the research portal. So we're going to take a look at this control and see what the research portal can do for us. Because what's important in all of this is the language. We're communicating to people in our organization that they must do something. Interpreting what they must do is critical to being successful when being audited. If you don't know what encryption is, or does that mean taking a Sharpie and drawing a line through it? No. What is incident management? They had a party and the cake fell off the table? No. It's really communicating what is the definition of these things that the auditor is going to be looking at. And that's where the research portal can really help you understand the language of the mandates within the citations and the common controls. Let's pop over here to the research portal and just click this icon right here. And this is the taxonomy of the Unified Compliance Framework. Authority documents with their citations and mandates are tagged and then are able to get definitions for each tagged term phrase, verbs and nouns, that allows it to map to the common control with all that metadata that I talked about before. The audit questions, the assets, the roles, an amazing amount of information that we can associate with this common control. Let's go back to the control that we were looking at. And that was control number 4734. Let's take a look at where it is in the hierarchy. Wow. We have over 15,000 controls in our framework. And notice all of these controls that are about breach notification. Let's see what this maps to. Here's our common control with our nouns and our verbs. Mapped to many citations. Interesting right here. Do you think they were talking to each other? Each one of these is a unique authority document ID. It is a unique authority document, but everybody's saying the same thing. This is very typical with state privacy. I have seen it wholesale lifted from one state to another, except Colorado. There must have been somebody in IT who was on that because they go all the way in the weeds on how to execute all this, thinking, how did that happen? So here we are, and we should be looking for our authority document 2862. Here we go. And here we have our common control, what California is saying. And we can take a look at this relationship between the common control and the mandate within the citation. When something is the same term, we have a 100% match. It could also have other relationships, but if we can identify the same term in a common control and a mandate, or synonymous, we have a very high match. That is how we know our framework has integrity, that we are saying the same thing. Let's go back and take a look at that California law in its entirety. So again, we're looking at document 2862. We can even see what other documents might be around that. Look at all the laws from California. They're busy. And we can see all of the citations, not just this one, but all of them. And here we have things that aren't saying anything quite yet. Simply document the organization's environment, but now we get into the controls. And there's our favorite control, 4734. We can take a look at another one. Let's take a look at 4746 and its relationship. Do a little reload here. There we go. This is a description of the breach incident. We can see the terms in the dictionary. Breach notification, what does that mean? We have multiple definitions. We select those definitions when we're doing the mapping. We can see the relationships of the words that relate to breach notification. All these different colored lines have different meanings as to what the relationship is. We can also see the different citations that use the words breach notification. All of this helps us get clarity around what other people are saying and how to interpret it. You'll notice it's used over and over again in many authority documents. And we can even take a look at other authority documents. So not just our 2862, but let's take a look at 2962, New Mexico. Remember, I said they tend to copy each other. You know, and we can see it's not such a bad thing that we're doing business in New Mexico. We're covered because we've been doing all these other states and they're so similar. That's really the research portal. The next thing I'd like to go over is the output from all of this. But before I do, Teresa, do we have any other questions that we want to answer right now?
Sorry about that. I was actually looking at the questions. You must have ESP. I was looking at the questions when you asked that. Actually, we do. You've been talking a lot about the different citations and different regulations and mentioning a bunch of the different ones that are pretty common. But we've got a question from Gordon that's asking about having his own internal control framework. What can he do with that? Is there some way to get that into the UCF, into the Common Controls Hub?
Yes. There's two ways. There's the old-fashioned way, which is once you have this data brought into ServiceNow, what we see here is this is the ServiceNow policy. We call that the common control. And then we have the citation reference. And the beautiful thing about ServiceNow GRC is they include not only the citation reference, but also the text. And then what you can do with your framework is you can add that within ServiceNow GRC. It's a manual process. Everything is a manual process, by the way. There is no easy button. But you can go through and say, oh, I've got something that covers that, and I call it, you know, this section of this particular document, and I'll enter, you know, that's my reference, and there's my text. And you go through and you associate manually your framework with the controls that are here. You may need to add some, and you may not have coverage for some. And that's part of the gap analysis that we'll cover at the end of this presentation. So you can do it manually by bringing it into ServiceNow. You can also bring it into the Common Controls Hub, where we go through the same mapping process. You can do it, or we can do it for you, or a combination, where you can bring in your framework and it has all the same features and functionality applied to it as any other authority document. So you can compare, you can make it a column here, you can do whatever you want, just like as if it was any other authority document, except that it's private. Nobody else can see it but you.
I must have been on mute. I was looking at the questions. when you asked me that. So I think you actually addressed the question that I was reading to you about, what if I have my own internal framework?
Mm-hmm.
How do I get that into the UCF or to Common Controls Hub?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and when we bring this into ServiceNow, one of the things we try to do, first you'll find your catalog of authority documents. So we try to keep that very concise and very easy to find for you. But then we also take these citations in and we put them in English. So all that data that Linda was talking about before that we bring into ServiceNow GRC, we make that visible to you. So you can actually see the different citations and what they actually mean. You can see the different controls. And then you can go through the whole GRC process of mapping those controls to various policies and actually, ideally, move on toward automating the monitoring of those controls for continuous monitoring to compliance. I also had another question, now that I'm actually off mute, that, so here's a question from Jeffrey. We've heard about your Unified Compliance Framework Mapper solution. You've actually mentioned it a couple of times.
Mm-hmm.
Are you going to explain that? If you are, is there a limit to the number of frameworks I can include? And do I have to pay separately for each one?
All right. So that's a multi-thing question. I encourage you to go to a site it's www.ucfmapper.com. So UCFMAPPER.com. Got all the information you could ever want about the mapper. That in and of itself is its own presentation. And to answer your question about number of documents, you can bring in as many documents as you like. There's no limit on that. We have not run up against that problem yet because it does take quite a while to map something in. And so you can have as many documents as you like mapped into your account. We're not going to charge you any extra. We don't charge extra for the amount of documents you have in your list. You can have up to 100 in a list. That's a technical limitation. But it's like a good example is a pay-for document, such as COVID. You need to provide your ISACA member and be in good standing, and then we turn that on for you because that is a pay-for document. It's your license of COVID that allows you inclusion of the mapping because it's really your document. We're just providing the mapping. So we have public domain documents. We have documents that we need you to demonstrate that you have access to. We have documents that are private, but all of it is included in the basic plus API license fee.
And we've got a couple more questions. We've been talking a lot about controls, and I wanted to call out a little bit more how we take these citations and how we can create a common control, and then how we can test that control. The control owner can attach evidence to that control, and then that control, having answered it once, will satisfy the requirements for all the different authority documents and policies that are mapped to that particular control. So one of the questions is, showing compliance, we need to assign controls to an owner, and how would the tie compliance to the same evidence, not needing to upload twice. When you upload that evidence to that particular control, when you're answering the attestation, when we are ideally automatically being able to identify the evidence within the platform, once you attest to that control and you attach that evidence, you do it once. And then in the system, because UCF has mapped this to multiple policies, to multiple authority documents, that one action of yours addresses the questions for all the mapped policies and authority documents. So that's really the power of this. I think, Mark, you've kind of honed in on that.
Definitely, absolutely. It doesn't make the auditors go away, but everybody will love you in your organization because you made their lives so much better, and it's no longer, again, I got it once a year, once a quarter, I need to provide this for you. So yes, you reduce the audit fatigue within your organization. It's so important. And remember, your allies are the ones that have been suffering from the fatigue. Your detractors are the ones that want these multiple audits taking place over and over and over and over again. So you really are that champion for your organization to streamline and make things more efficient. So here we're looking at any other things we should. I have a couple more things I want to make sure we cover off, and then I'll do any last questions.
Perfect.
Thank you. Okay, so here we are, and this on the left are our common controls, also known as ServiceNow GRC policies. Like we talked about before, the items in bold are tied to one or more mandates within one or more of these documents. The things in italics are not. Notice there's nothing tied to them. They're simply there to maintain the hierarchy. So we go through and we see all sorts of controls around leadership. We start to see overlap in different areas. The more concentration you have, the more focus you need to have on ensuring that those controls are satisfied because they're subjected to multiple audits. That's a real opportunity. You could also see where things are in isolation. For example, here with PCI, you know that you might not want to apply all these controls to your entire environment if you've given a good shot at isolating your PCI environment. Again, look at the large concentration that we have around this, around logging. So you know you need to make a sizable investment in your logging systems, centralizing it. I want to take a look here at technical security. You can see all the different controls in here. All of these controls are tied to audit questions. Let me go ahead here and take a look at what those audit questions might look like. This is the output from the Common Controls Hub, which is what we feed into. It doesn't go into Excel. It goes in through an API gateway into ServiceNow GRC. But we can see with these audit guidelines, so we'll take a look at technical security, how they tie to the common control, one or more audit questions that start that process as we're doing our evidence collection. Do you do this? You do? Yes, great. Give me a URL, give me a screenshot, give me a name, give me some evidence that I can put now into ServiceNow GRC. But this, again, allows your organization to become familiar with the questions that may be asked of them one time, not multiple times for multiple audits. And finally, the auditor rolls around, and we have to be mindful of the fact that the auditor cares about their world, their universe. So PCI, our ROC, Report on Compliance. We know we've collected evidence and communicated with our organization based upon the common controls. And notice how nicely written PCI 3.2 is. We tag the nouns and verbs that are associated with that common control. We want to see the association. We can go back to the research portal. Notice how similar these are, these controls, and the mandates within the citations. Notice how well written PCI is, where it has very few multiple mandates within the same citation. Notice it doesn't have much redundancy. Let's look at the opposite end of the spectrum and look at GDPR. Remember I said that you can say, oops, that's PCI, my bad. So with GDPR, they say a whole lot of nothing for quite a bit of time. If anybody's familiar with GDPR, they know exactly what I'm talking about. So here we have a lot of fluff here. That's not too bad. But now we start getting into these mandates and trying to find those within the citation. That's one of the beauties of using the Unified Compliance Framework, is that you don't have to dig around to find out all the different things that they're saying. And not only do they say multiple things within a single citation, many times they say the same thing over and over again. Here's an example. Article 5.1b maps to process personal data for surveys, archives, and scientific research. And they say that in different ways. Here they say historical research purposes. I always thought you could keep research and keep a history on it, but that's just me. And so, but you can see over and over again, they're saying something more than once within the same citation with multiple mandates. So again, this type of information is all presented in ServiceNow GRC, and it helps you understand and streamline all of your compliance efforts. Word of caution that I want to offer you. Many times we look at this as control by control, but let's take a look at if we were to add NIST 800-171. I'm going to go over here to this directory. And if we were to look at the one-for-one comparison, and again, this is all data that's present in ServiceNow GRC. But we take a look at the one-for-one comparison. We can see this is NIST 800-171, exactly what it says. And we can see the coverage that we have with NIST 800. This is again for HIPAA, and then ISO and FedRAMP and so forth. But what if we get nervous and we start to see places where we don't have coverage? Like, oh my gosh, you know, here I could find controls that might not have coverage, like maybe this one here, where it's got a mandate within it to track, review, and approve, and it ties to this control. I've got a little bit of coverage around here, but not everything. So I'm nervous. What does that mean? I've got exposure. Well, hold on. Remember, controls are different based upon language. Okay, so there's got to be enough differentiation, but things can be very similar. So let's take a look at this holistically. So let's take a look at that control, 6881. Go back here and see what 6881 looks like in my audit universe. I'm going to go ahead and do a find on this. And I will find that control. Notice that here it is with NIST 800-171 all by itself, but what are we doing for PCI? We're configuring the log to capture system level objective creation and deletion. This one is configured the log to capture configuration changes. Maybe, just imagine trying to segregate this out. Now, PCI may have said this, but maybe you're already doing everything on configuration changes, and it's okay. This informs you as to what you are already doing, and it's not always about the one-for-one matching. You also need to look in ServiceNow GRC and look at where controls fall in areas before you hit the alarm button that we're not covered. That's all I've got to say. I'm sorry that we only have 1 minute left. Glad I was able to get those questions in. My information, I believe, is posted. Teresa, is there anything else we should say in closing?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you for your time. There's a great video. We've got a couple questions from Mark that's wanting to know about the controls and how it all fits together with ServiceNow GRC. We got a great video we'll post in the chat for you guys to take a look at, and more material on the GRC website, and of course on the UCF website. We'll make sure we post that link also. And just, hope you enjoyed your time with us, and thank you so much, Lynn, for presenting this.
My pleasure.